I did not raise my voice. I did not send a single angry text. I did not show up at her door demanding explanations. I simply picked up the phone, called my attorney of 22 years, and said 4 words. Martin, start the process. Then I hung up, walked to my kitchen, and made myself a cup of coffee. I stood at the window and watched the maple tree in my backyard drop its leaves one by one into the still October air. And I thought about my late wife, Eleanor. I thought about what she would have said. She would have said, "Raymond, you already knew." She would have been right. I had known for longer than I was willing to admit. But let me back up, because if you're a father, if you've poured 30 years of your life into raising a child and loving them and trusting them with things that cannot be replaced, you deserve to understand exactly how this happens. Slowly, quietly, with a smile on their face the entire time. My name is Raymond Holt. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, the kind of work that teaches you to look for stress fractures before a bridge falls. I retired at 62, 2 years after Eleanor passed away from a diagnosis that moved faster than any of us expected. We had been married for 38 years. She was the architecture of everything good in my life. I have 2 children, a son, Thomas, who lives in Portland with his wife and my 2 grandsons. Thomas calls me every Sunday without fail. He has never once asked me for money, not once in 40 years. And I have a daughter, Cassandra, 43 years old, lives 40 minutes from me here in Asheville, North Carolina, with her husband Gregory. I need you to understand something before I continue, friends. I loved Cassandra completely. I still love her. In the way that a father cannot stop loving a child no matter what that child does. But love and trust are not the same thing. And the moment I learned the difference, my life changed forever. Cassandra was always the sharper of my 2 children, quick-minded, persuasive. She had a gift for knowing exactly what to say to make you feel that her idea was one you had arrived at yourself. Gregory was a quieter man, pleasant enough at holiday dinners, though I always sensed he measured things in ways that made me uneasy. He had changed jobs 4 times in 6 years, always with a perfectly reasonable explanation. The business had restructured. His skills were better suited elsewhere. The commute was unsustainable. There was always a story, and Cassandra always delivered it with her mother's warmth and her father's logic, which made it twice as convincing. After Eleanor died, Cassandra became my primary family anchor. She brought meals on Wednesday evenings. She called during the week to check on me. She was present in the way that a grieving father desperately needs someone to be present. I was grateful. I told her so often. And it was genuine, please understand that. I was not naive. I was grieving, which is a different thing entirely. In the spring of my 4th year alone, I had a cardiac event. Nothing catastrophic, the doctors described it as a warning, a significant blockage that required a stent procedure and a 3-week recovery period. I was hospitalized for 5 days. During those 5 days, Cassandra was at my bedside every morning. She managed my medication schedule. She spoke with my doctors. She was the daughter I had always believed she was. On the 4th day, she placed a document in front of me. Dad. The hospital administrator said it's standard practice for patients in recovery. It just designates someone to handle your affairs if anything unexpected happens. It doesn't mean anything is going to happen. It's just responsible planning. The document was a durable power of attorney. I was 65 years old, recovering from a heart procedure, on a mild sedative to manage my blood pressure, and my daughter was sitting beside me holding my hand with tears in her eyes telling me it was standard practice. I signed it. I want you to sit with that for a moment, friends. I want you to think about someone you trust completely. At the moment you are most physically vulnerable, telling you something is routine. I want you to think about what you would have done. I signed it. I went home 3 weeks later. My recovery was unremarkable. I felt better than I had in years, honestly. The blockage had apparently been building for some time, and clearing it gave me an energy I had not felt since before Eleanor's illness. I started walking every morning. I began cooking real meals again. I called Thomas more often. I felt, for the first time since losing Eleanor, that I was stepping back into my own life. Cassandra visited less frequently after my recovery. I noticed, but I attributed it to the natural rhythm of things. She had done the hard work of being present during the crisis. The crisis had passed. This seemed reasonable. This seemed like something a well-adjusted father tells himself. 7 months after my hospital stay, I received a notification from my bank. It was a routine alert. I had set them up years ago, at my financial advisor's suggestion, to flag any transaction above a certain threshold. I had never had cause to pay much attention to them. I opened the notification on my phone while sitting on my back porch in the early morning, coffee in hand, the maple tree full and green. The alert was for a wire transfer of $68,000 from my investment account. I set down my coffee very carefully. I went inside and sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I pulled up the full account history. The $68,000 transfer had cleared 2 days prior. The receiving account was not one I recognized. I went back further in the history. There was a second transfer, 11 weeks earlier, for $41,000. There was a third, 14 weeks before that, for $29,000, $138,000. Gone. I did not panic. I want you to understand that. I am an engineer. When I find a stress fracture, I document it. I measure it. I understand the load before I decide how to respond. I opened a fresh document on my computer, and I began writing down every date, every amount, every account number I could find. Then I called my bank and asked to speak with a fraud specialist. What they told me took approximately 40 minutes to fully explain and approximately 4 seconds to fully break my heart. The transfers had been authorized. Properly authorized, using a valid power of attorney document, a durable power of attorney granted to one Cassandra Marie Holt Weber, dated the previous spring, signed by one Raymond Allen Holt, signed in a hospital room, on the 4th day of a 5-day stay, by a man on blood pressure medication sitting next to the daughter he trusted more than anyone else in his life. I thanked the fraud specialist. I asked her to flag all 3 transactions as disputed pending investigation. I told her I would be in contact with legal counsel and asked her to document that conversation. She was professional and kind in the way that people are when they understand that the person on the other end of the line is absorbing something catastrophic while trying very hard not to show it. I hung up the phone. I sat in my chair for a long time. I thought about Cassandra at 8 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with her hair in 2 uneven braids, holding a drawing she had made for Eleanor's birthday. I thought about driving her to her first college visit, the way she had pressed her forehead against the car window watching the campus go by. I thought about her wedding, the way she had taken my arm at the entrance of the church and said, "Don't let me trip, Dad." And I had said, "I never have." And she had laughed, and Eleanor had cried from the front pew. I thought about all of it. And then I opened my phone and called Martin Graves, who had been my attorney since I was 45 years old. And I said, "Martin, start the process." Now, friends, if you've ever been where I was in that moment, you know that the pain does not arrive all at once. It comes in waves. The first wave is disbelief. You construct every possible alternative explanation. A bank error, a misunderstanding about shared accounts, some authorized transaction you simply cannot remember. You build these explanations carefully and you hold them up against the evidence, and one by one they fall apart. The second wave is grief. And this grief is particular, and it is deep, because you are not only grieving the money, you are grieving the version of your child you believed existed. You are grieving every moment of closeness that you are now forced to examine from a new angle. The Wednesday evening meals, the hospital bedside, the hand holding yours while you signed a document she described as routine. The third wave, and this is the one that changed everything for me, is clarity. Martin had sent his paralegal, a meticulous young woman named Diane, to pull and review every document associated with the power of attorney. What Diane found over the following 2 weeks was methodical in its design. The 3 wire transfers to an account registered to a limited liability company formed in Gregory's name 8 months prior, 2 months before my cardiac event. The company had been registered in Delaware, which offers a degree of financial privacy that is not accidental. Gregory had set up the receiving account before I ever signed that document. Let me say that again, because I want you to feel the weight of it, friends. Gregory had created the company before I had the cardiac event, which meant one of 2 things. Either they had anticipated the opportunity and waited for it, or they had begun planning before the opportunity presented itself, and my hospitalization simply accelerated their timeline. Martin's assessment was quiet and precise. "Raymond," he said, "this was not opportunistic. This was premeditated." I nodded. I had already arrived at that conclusion. I simply needed to hear it from someone else to accept it fully. Now, I want to tell you what I did not do, because this is the part that I think matters most. I did not call Cassandra. I did not drive to her house. I did not send an email demanding explanations or confronting her with evidence or asking her how she could have done this. I did not discuss it with mutual friends. I did not tell Thomas, not yet. I did not alter my behavior toward Cassandra in any way that she could detect. When she texted to ask how I was doing, I responded as I always had, brief, warm, unremarkable, feeling good, walking every morning. The maple is turning. She sent back a heart emoji. I looked at it for a long time. I did not react. I planned. Martin filed to have the power of attorney revoked immediately on grounds of undue influence and improper execution. I had not had independent legal counsel present when I signed, which under North Carolina law creates grounds for challenge, particularly given the circumstances of my mental state during a medical procedure. Simultaneously, he filed a civil complaint against Cassandra and Gregory for financial elder abuse and breach of fiduciary duty. My financial advisor, a man named Carl who has handled my accounts for 15 years and who was quietly furious in the way that careful men become furious, worked with Martin's team to freeze and recover the disputed funds. Because the transfers had been flagged within the investigation window, and the receiving account was a newly formed domestic entity, the recovery process, while not guaranteed, had viable legal pathways. But here is where I want to slow down and tell you about Thomas. I called my son on a Tuesday evening, not a Sunday, which he immediately recognized as unusual. When he answered, his first words were, "Dad, what's wrong?" I told him everything. I was matter-of-fact about it. I gave him the dates, the amounts, the structure of what had happened. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, that particular stillness that precedes something large. When I finished, he said, "Dad, I need to fly out there." I said, "Not yet, son. Not until Martin is further along. I don't want Gregory or Cassandra to sense that anything has changed." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you okay?" And I thought about that question carefully, the way my father taught me to think before I answered anything that mattered. My father was a quiet man from eastern Tennessee who believed that honest answers required the same effort as honest work. "I'm grieving," I told Thomas. "But I'm not broken." He said, "You never are." And his voice when he said it was something I will carry with me for whatever years I have left. Now, during the weeks that Martin's process was underway, I was doing something else quietly, in the evenings, at my desk. I was thinking about Cassandra's daughter. Cassandra and Gregory have one child, a girl named Iris, who is 9 years old. Iris has my mother's eyes and Eleanor's laugh, and absolutely none of her parents' calculation. She is loud and funny and deeply sincere in the way that 9-year-olds are before the world teaches them to perform sincerity instead of feel it. She calls me Grandpa Ray, and she once spent an entire Saturday afternoon explaining to me the detailed internal politics of her 4th-grade classroom, with the gravity of someone briefing a congressional committee. I love Iris without condition or complexity. Whatever her parents have done, Iris is innocent of it. She did not choose her circumstances. She did not choose the people who would shape her earliest understanding of what family means. This is where my father's voice came back to me most clearly. He used to say that how a man responds to being wronged reveals more about his character than how he behaves when everything is right. He was not a complicated man, my father. He was a man who meant what he said. I called my estate attorney separate from Martin, a woman named Judith who specializes in trusts and multi-generational wealth planning, and I asked her to create an independent education trust for Iris. The trust would be administered by Thomas as trustee, entirely outside of Cassandra and Gregory's legal reach. It would fund Iris's education from secondary school through postgraduate, unconditionally, regardless of what happened between her parents and me. Judith looked at me across her desk and said, "Raymond, are you sure, given the current situation?" "Judith," I said, "the current situation is exactly why I'm sure." She nodded slowly. She understood. On a Wednesday morning in November, approximately 9 weeks after I had first seen that bank notification on my back porch, Martin called me to tell me that the civil complaint had been formally served to Cassandra and Gregory. I was walking the Greenway Trail near my house when my phone rang. I stopped under a bare oak tree, leaves thick on the ground, the sky that particular flat gray of a North Carolina autumn. Martin said, "Cassandra called my office 20 minutes after service. She's asking to speak with you directly." I said, "Tell her I'm not available." He said, "Gregory's attorney has already reached out. They're indicating a willingness to negotiate full restitution in exchange for withdrawal of the complaint." I said, "My terms are full restitution plus legal fees, a formal acknowledgement in writing of the conduct, and a guarantee of no future contact without my written consent. Those terms are not negotiable." Martin said, "Raymond, a negotiated settlement would likely—" "Martin," I said, "I know what a settlement would likely do. I also know what it would not do. Please convey my terms." I hung up and continued my walk. The geese were moving south in their irregular formations overhead, calling to each other in the cold air. My phone buzzed 40 minutes later. A text from Cassandra. "Dad, please. I need you to hear me. I can explain everything. Please don't do this. Think about Iris." I read it twice. I thought about Iris. I had been thinking about Iris for 9 weeks. I had spent considerable time and care ensuring that Iris would be protected. What I was doing, in fact, was the most deliberate thing I had ever done for Iris's future. I put my phone in my jacket pocket and finished my walk. Thomas flew in from Portland the following Friday. He arrived at my door with a duffel bag and a 12-year-old bottle of scotch, which was his father's son of him entirely. We sat in my living room that evening, and I showed him everything: the bank records, Martin's filings, Judith's trust documentation, the timeline of transfers relative to the formation of Gregory's LLC. He sat quietly through all of it. He turned pages carefully and looked at numbers and said nothing for a long time. Finally, he said, "She planned this." "Yes," I said. "Before your heart thing. Before my heart thing." He set the papers down on the coffee table. He looked at his hands for a moment. When he looked up at me, he said, "Dad, I want to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." I said, "Go ahead." I blamed myself for a while. After Mom died, I thought Cassandra was here. She was doing all the things, and I was far away, and I told myself that was enough, that she had it handled. He paused. I should have been watching. I should have been a better son from a closer distance. I looked at my boy, my 40-year-old son with gray beginning at his temples and Eleanor's mouth and his grandfather's steadiness. I said, "Thomas, what happened here was not the result of your absence. It was the result of your sister's choices. Those are not the same thing." He was quiet. "And," I said, "you are here now." We opened the scotch. The legal process moved in the way that legal processes move slowly, with paperwork, with procedural intervals, with the particular institutional patience that frustrates everyone involved. Gregory's attorney made 3 separate counterproposals, each one a different arrangement of the same insufficient offer. Martin rejected each one on my behalf, and my terms remained unchanged. 8 weeks after service of the complaint, full restitution was agreed to, $138,000, plus Martin's fees. The formal written acknowledgement was signed. The contact provision was documented. I did not celebrate. I poured a small glass of bourbon that evening, alone at my kitchen table, and I thought about Eleanor. I thought about what she would have felt sitting across from me in this moment. I think she would have been sad, deeply sad, but she would not have been surprised. Eleanor had a clarity about people that she expressed in gentle language, which made it easy to underestimate. She had once said about Cassandra, very quietly, on a Sunday afternoon years before she died, "Raymond, she loves you. But she loves herself first, and Gregory second, and everyone else is arranged below that." I had not wanted to hear it. I had tucked it away in that particular drawer where we put the truths we are not yet ready to live with. I am 67 years old, friends. I have built structures designed to bear extraordinary weight. I know how a thing looks when it is sound, and I know how it looks when it is compromised. And I know the difference between a repair that restores integrity and a repair that merely conceals damage. My relationship with Cassandra is damaged beyond the reach of a repair that would restore integrity. I have accepted this. It did not come easily or quickly. And the grief of it, the real grief, not the grief of the money, but the grief of the daughter, I believe she was that grief, is still present, and I expect it will be for some time. But Iris called me last week. She was breathless and funny and had an elaborate story about a science project involving a potato battery and a significant misunderstanding with her teacher. She talked for 20 minutes. I laughed more than I have in months. When she said goodbye, she said, "Grandpa Ray, you're my favorite person to talk to." I said, "You're mine too, sweetheart." And that is true. That is simply and completely true. There are things that can be taken from you and things that cannot. $138,000 can be taken. Legal proceedings can recover it. The years I spent building trust with my daughter, those are gone. and no proceeding recovers them, and I carry that loss with the particular quietness of a man who has learned not to mistake silence for the absence of feeling. But there are also things that cannot be taken. Thomas calling every Sunday, my morning walks on the greenway, the maple tree in my backyard, the 12-year-old Scotch, the memory of Eleanor's laugh and the fact that I can still hear it clearly if I sit still long enough. And Iris, an education trust bearing her name, growing quietly in an account her parents cannot touch. A future secured by the grandfather who loved her without condition, before she was old enough to understand what that means or what it cost. My father was a man of few words. He believed that a man's response to being wronged should be measured in actions, not in volume. He believed that dignity was not the absence of anger but the discipline to remain yourself in the presence of it. He worked with his hands, and he raised his children with patience, and he never once, in all the years I knew him, raised his voice in anger. I have tried to be that man. I do not always succeed. There are mornings when I walk the greenway and the anger surfaces, and it is not small and it is not quiet, and it asks me very directly why I gave that woman every good thing I had and how she repaid it. On those mornings I walk further. I breathe the cold air. I watch the geese, and I come home, and I make my coffee, and I stand at my kitchen window and I look at the maple tree, and I think, I am still here. I am still myself. She did not take that. Nobody takes that. My father used to say that a man's character is not what he builds when conditions are favorable. It is what remains standing after everything else has been stripped away. Friends, I am still standing. And if you are sitting somewhere right now carrying something similar, a betrayal you did not earn, a wound from someone you never should have had to protect yourself from, I want you to hear me when I say, the silence you are choosing is not weakness. The patience you are keeping is not passivity. The calm you are holding on to while the storm moves through you is the most powerful thing you have. Do not let anyone take it from you, not even someone you loved first.